There is a specific kind of silence that only exists in places designed to be perfectly safe. This is Lumina Academy, an elite sanctuary where every heartbeat and breath is translated into data by an AI oversight system that promised a world without shadows. Olena Varta was the crown jewel of this institution. To the parents, a whisper of souls; to the world, a vision of curated perfection. At 6:14 p.m., she looks at the eye in the sky and offers a final gesture of compliance to the machine, watching her every move. She walks toward the elevator, her heels striking the floor with the rhythmic finality of a metronome. A life moving toward a vanishing point, she enters the steel box. In a building with 3,000 sensors, this is where the AI loses its sight for a microsecond. The doors open, but the elevator is empty. In the span of a 3-floor descent, Olena Varta simply evaporated. She became a digital ghost. The police would find no intruders, no hardware malfunctions, just a terrifying, clinical absence of evidence. While the adults searched for a glitch in the code, 5-year-old Artem was looking at something else. He was looking at the truth. 7 days later, he would start to draw. The investigation didn't begin with a scream or a siren. It began with the hum of servers and the smell of ozone. When the police arrived at Lumina Academy, they didn't find a crime scene, they found a vacuum. A space so clean, so devoid of human error, that it felt hostile to the touch. They moved through the halls like surgeons entering a body that had already gone cold. The lead detective, a man whose eyes had seen 1,000 horrors, looked visibly unnerved by the perfection of it all. There was no blood to track, no force locks, no signs of a life interrupted. They retreated to the server room, the brain of the building. Here, the glass room AI lived in a rack of obsidian towers. Millions of dollars spent to ensure that not a single shadow could fall without being logged, timestamped, and uploaded to a cloud. Terabytes of data, thousands of hours of high-definition silence. The detectives scrolled through the footage, their faces bathed in sickly monitor light. They watched the elevator doors open and close, over and over, expecting the laws of physics to eventually correct themselves. The AI insisted Olena Varta was still inside, yet the thermal imaging cameras showed a cold, empty cabin. The dread began to set in when they realized there were no blind spots. In Lumina, every inch of space is accounted for. If she could disappear here, in the most watched building in the city, then the very concept of surveillance was a lie. This is the "it could be you" factor. It is the realization that hits you when you look at your smart doorbell. If the architecture of safety can be turned into an architecture of erasure, then none of us are ever truly safe. The investigation turned inward, toward the digital. They looked for hacks, for backdoors, for a ghost in the machine, but the logs were pristine. No unauthorized logins, no overridden protocols. The system hadn't been broken, it had been used as intended. As the week drew to a close, the police stopped looking for a body and started looking for a miracle. They didn't know that the evidence wasn't hidden in the cloud. It was waiting in the mind of a 5-year-old boy. Time didn't just pass, it curdled. 7 days of a silence so heavy, it felt like a physical weight. A week since Olena Varta stepped into a steel box and became a ghost. Out here, the world stopped breathing. At the gates, the vigil grew. Morning candles bled white wax onto the cold asphalt, flickering against a damp, static-filled wind. Her face, frozen in 1,000 social media posts, looked back at the crowd smiling, vibrant, and increasingly unrecognizable. Then came the circus. The digital voyeurs and the tragedy chasers descended, their cameras humming like locusts. In the absence of facts, they manufactured monsters. They spoke of voluntary disappearance, a woman fleeing her own perfection. Theory spread through the elite community like poison. Digital kidnapping, they whispered in private encrypted chats. The idea that someone hadn't taken her body, but had hijacked her life, erasing her from the grid entirely. The tension reached a breaking point. These were people who bought security to buy peace of mind. Now, every lock felt like a trap. Every safe nursery felt like a glass cage. The technology used to shield their children was now the source of unblinking dread. Trust evaporated. Parents looked at the teachers looked at the security guards, and everyone looked at the cameras. We are the most documented generation in history, yet we have never been more lost. We see everything, but understand nothing. By the fourth day, the school was a tomb. The hallways, once filled with children, were silent. The air conditioning hummed mournfully. The glass roommate continued to record the emptiness, archiving the void in 4K resolution, 60 frames per second. The media began to dig into her blog, her papers, her digital footprint. They looked for cracks in the porcelain. They wanted her to be a villain, because a perfect victim is too terrifying. If she could be taken, anyone could. On the seventh night, the fever broke. Search parties returned with empty hands and hollow eyes. The police stopped giving conferences. The 7-day silence had become a permanent state. The world was ready to move on to the next digital ghost. But in a house on the edge of the woods, the silence was about to be broken, not by a confession, but by a child. Artem hadn't spoken a word all week. He was picking up a crayon, and he was about to draw what the cameras refused to see. Communication is often a secondary instinct for those who see the world in patterns rather than words. For 5-year-old Artem, speech was a clumsy tool, a blunt instrument for a mind that operated in the high-frequency range of pure observation. In the quiet of his room, away from the blinking eyes of the glass room, Artem began to translate. He didn't use the digital tablets his father manufactured. He chose the primitive, the physical. He chose the permanence of wax and pressure. There is a specific violence in the way a child draws when they are trying to purge a memory. The strokes are too heavy. The lines are too deliberate. Each mark on the page is a scar, a forced reconstruction of a moment that should never have been witnessed. He draws a tree, a weeping willow. It is a landmark of the local park, 40 miles from the kindergarten gates. A place of Sunday picnics and forced smiles. But Artem's tree is bleeding. The green is too bright, too sharp, a digital green bleeding into the physical world. The air in the room feels thin, ionized. His mother watches from the doorway, her presence a mere blur in the periphery of his focus. She sees the intensity in his small, white knuckles. She hears the sound of the paper groaning under the weight of his truth. Beneath the roots, he etches a void. A black box. It isn't just a shape, it's a weight. He fills it in with a frantic, obsessive energy until the paper is nearly torn through. It is a grave drawn by a hand that shouldn't know what a grave is. When he hands it to her, the silence in the house changes. It's no longer the silence of a waiting room. It's the silence of a gallows. She looks down at the black box, at the figure trapped inside the heavy layers of charcoal and wax. Inside the darkness, Artem has placed a detail that stops her heart to spakes of blue. Not just any blue, the precise, oxidized turquoise of the vintage earrings Olena Varta wore on the Tuesday she vanished. Earrings that weren't in any of the missing person posters. A 5-year-old boy has no reason to know the geometry of a burial. He has no reason to know the specific glint of jewelry under 6 feet of earth. The drawing isn't a child's imagination. It's a blueprint. He doesn't say a word. He doesn't have to. The drawing lies on the expensive marble countertop, a primitive scream in a digital world. The question is, whose eyes was he looking through when he saw the blue earrings go into the dark? The geography of a nightmare is rarely logical. It doesn't obey the boundaries of city limits or the safety of distance. When the police arrived at the park, they weren't following a lead or a witness statement. They were following the frantic, waxy map of a 5-year-old's imagination. The park was beautiful in a way that felt insulting. The sunset bled across the horizon, painting the willow tree in gold, masking the rot that lay beneath its roots. It was a place for lovers and joggers, a curated piece of nature 40 miles away. 40 miles from the cold glass of Lumina Academy. A distance that should have provided an alibi for a child who hadn't left his zip code. Yet, as the steel of the shovel bit into the soil, the air seemed to thicken with the scent of wet iron. There is a specific frequency to the sound of a shovel hitting something that isn't stone or root, a hollow, muffled thud. It is the sound of a secret finally losing its breath. Clink, the sound of reality shattering. The police froze. In the fading light, the black box from Artem's drawing began to emerge, not a box, but a high-grade, industrial equipment case. They worked in a feverish silence now, the clinical detachment of the investigation placed by a primal, sweating urgency. The latches on the case were modern, magnetic, clicking open with a soft, electronic hiss that felt entirely out of place in the mud. As the lid was raised, the flashlight beam caught a glint of something small and floral, blue, oxidized. It was exactly as he had drawn it. The blue earring, the exact knot, a 4K recreation of a crayon sketch. The discovery didn't bring closure. It brought a new kind of terror. Because while they had found Olena Varta, they had lost the trail of logic. Artem's GPS tag never left the city. How does a child who never left his room see into a grave 40 miles away? The police stood in the dirt, their technology useless. They were looking at a body, but they should have been looking at the screens. The discovery was only the beginning of the glitch. Knowledge is a burden that has a specific weight, and on this day, that weight was resting entirely on the shoulders of a child. It wasn't just that Artem knew where she was. It was that he knew how she was. He had documented the mechanics of her end with a cold, drafting table precision. In the windowless basement of the precinct, the analysts sat in a trance of disbelief. They weren't looking at art. They were looking at a blueprint. They began to realize that the crude, waxen strokes held a level of structural integrity that defied every law of child development. There is a specific frequency to the sound of a shovel hitting something that isn't stone or root. No, wait. There. In the corner of the page, Artem had drawn a knot. Not a simple bow or a tangled scribble. He had rendered a constrictor knot, a specialist's ligature designed to tighten with every movement, a knot used by sailors or those who study restraint. How does a 5-year-old child understand the physics of a ligature? He had captured the way the tension pulls the skin, the specific overlap of the cord, the way the friction locks the life out of a body. The creepy kid trope is a staple of our nightmares because it represents a subversion of innocence. But this wasn't a movie. Artem sat in the observation room, a small island of stillness in a sea of frantic adults, his hands moving with a terrifying, mechanical grace. He had drawn the bruising, not as a smudge of purple, but as a series of specific, localized points where fingers had pressed into porcelain wrists. He had recorded the geometry of a struggle that the most advanced AI in the country had failed to see. The detectives began to feel a new kind of cold. It was the chill of the impossible. To know these details, Artem would have had to be standing inches away from the body. He would have had to watch the knot being tied. He would have had to hear the final, shallow breaths. But the logs don't lie. The glass room verified his presence in his bed at the exact hour of the crime. The GPS in his pajamas, the thermal sensors in his mattress, they all swore he was dreaming of cartoons and clouds. While Olena was being bound in a forest 40 miles away. This is where the dread shifts. It moves from the fear of a killer to the fear of the witness. If a child can see through walls, if he can see across counties, if he can observe the private moments of a murder, then the concept of a private moment is dead. They called it a digital anomaly. They called it a psychological breakthrough. But as the investigators looked at the impossible details on that piece of paper, they realized they weren't just looking at a witness. They were looking at a portal, and the portal was still open. The interrogation of a child is a delicate surgery of the mind. You cannot probe, you can only observe. The room was warm to a comfortable degree, bathed in a deceptive, amber glow designed to elicit trust, yet the air felt thin and brittle. Dr. Aris had spent 30 years decoding the silence of children. But this was different. Artem wasn't retreating into himself. He was projecting. His small hand moved with a terrifying, rhythmic certainty, as if he was simply tracing lines that were already etched into the air. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He didn't even look at the woman across from him. There is a specific kind of dread that accompanies a child who acts with the cold, calculated purpose of an adult. It's a subversion of the natural order, a glitch in the human timeline. As the psychologist leaned in, she noticed something that turned her blood to silt. He wasn't drawing a memory. When we remember, we draw with emotion-distorted sizes, exaggerated faces. But Artem was drawing with a clinical, flat field distortion. She realized he wasn't drawing the murder as a participant or a hidden witness. He was drawing it from an elevated angle, a wide-angle perspective. He was drawing the specific barrel distortion of a 2.8mm lens. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't drawing what he saw. He was drawing what he was shown. He was replicating a UI user interface of death. The black box wasn't just a grave. It was a viewing window. The psychological dread shifted. It wasn't that the boy was creepy. It was that he had been colonized. His eyes, once innocent, had been turned into secondary monitors. He had been forced to process high-definition trauma through a digital stream. "Artem," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who showed you this?" The boy finally looked up. His eyes didn't look like the eyes of a 5-year-old. They looked like lenses, glassy and reflective. He didn't point to a person. He pointed to the empty air. He pointed to the connectivity, to the invisible signals that saturate our homes. He was a child of the CEO of a tech giant, living in a house where the walls have ears and the mirrors have eyes. He hadn't seen a ghost, he had seen a broadcast. The dread was no longer about the killer in the woods. It was about the killer in the circuit. Artem wasn't a witness to a crime. He was the youngest subscriber to a snuff film he never asked to see, and the glass room was just the beginning of the feed. The truth did not arrive in a flash of intuition. It arrived in the dark, whispered through the cold binary of a forensic data dump. We believe our walls are solid, that our glass is a barrier. But in the architecture of the modern soul, every window is a two-way mirror. The glass room wasn't failing. It was performing. The AI hadn't suffered a glitch. It had been granted a master. Someone had reached through the silicon veil and turned the kindergarten sanctuary into a private theater for the depraved. They call themselves the digital Voyagers, a ghost cell of onlookers who don't just watch life, they consume it. They didn't want the sanitized feed of a parent's peace of mind. They wanted the raw, unedited friction of a life being extinguished in real time. The killer wasn't a ghost in the elevator, he was the director. He knew exactly where the sensors ended and where the dead zones lived, or rather, he created them. He didn't just take Olena, he choreographed her exit for an audience of 300 silent, paying shadows. The elevator wasn't empty. To the police, it was a void. But to the Voyagers, it was a stage. By injecting a loop data packet into the security hub, the killer masked his presence from the law while broadcasting his movement. The digital threat is not a virus that breaks your computer. It is a virus that breaks your reality. While the detectives were searching for a physical trail, the murder was being peer-to-peer shared across 64 nodes, encrypted behind digital obsidian. And here is the twist that rots the heart. Artem's father, the man who built the very systems meant to protect his son, was the one who left the door unlocked. Not out of malice, but out of the arrogance of the creator. He believed his encryption was a wall to the Voyagers. It was a challenge. Artem hadn't wandered into the woods. He had wandered into his father's study. He had picked up a tablet that was already logged in, already authenticated. He sat in the safety of his plush bedroom and watched the digital Voyager's feed. He watched his teacher die in high definition. The "it could be you" factor reaches its terminal velocity here. We have invited the world into our homes through our lenses, doorbells, smart toys. We have traded our privacy for a feeling of safety, only to find that the Watchers are already inside the house. Olena Varta didn't die at a blind spot. She died in the brightest light imaginable. She was a rising star who became the content for a dark web premiere. And the witness wasn't a psychic child, he was just the only one who didn't know how to look away. The monster in the woods is a myth we tell to keep children from wandering. The real predator doesn't hide in the trees. He hides in the administrative privileges. He's the man who knows your password. He's the one you thank for keeping the Wi-Fi running. Meet the silent architect. Whether it was the lead IT administrator or a trusted parent with too much access, the betrayal was architectural. He didn't need to break a window. He simply created a backdoor, a digital crawl space where he could sit, unseen, in the walls of the academy. Click, pulse, stream. He spent months mapping the glass room. He wasn't just a voyeur. He was the engineer of the erasure. He was the one who ensured the elevator footage would loop, creating the ghost that baffled the police while he watched from the basement. But technology is a disobedient servant. It leaves trails. It leaves windows open. In the sterile quiet of the CEO's home office, a tablet lay on a mahogany desk, unlocked, unattended, and tethered to the back end. A window into the abyss, left ajar by a father's hubris. To a 5-year-old, the world is still a series of moving pictures. He doesn't understand the finality of a knot or the weight of a shovel. Artem climbed the stool, his small heart beating in time with the processor's hum, and he began to watch. He watched the scary cartoon. He saw the woman he loved, the teacher who smelled of vanilla and old books, struggling against a man who looked like a shadow. He watched as the red crayon lines he would later draw acted out in the cold, blue light of the liquid crystal display. He watched the stream until the battery died. He sat in the dark. The afterimage of blue earrings burned into his retinas like a solar flare. He didn't scream because he didn't know he was watching a murder. He thought it was just another story, a dark fable for a digital child. The accomplice wasn't just the man with the knife. It was the man with the access. While the killer worked in the mud, he was scrubbing logs. He was the one who made the impossible possible. But he forgot the child. He forgot that the human eye is the ultimate recorder. The accomplice had secured the cloud, but he couldn't secure the mind of a boy who decided to draw the truth into existence. The "it could be you" factor is a ghost in your own machine. The person you pay to keep the world out invited the world in. The accomplice is still there. He's in the updates. He's in the settings. He's the whisper in the wire. The resolution of a tragedy is rarely a healing. It is merely the cessation of noise. The killer was found, the accomplice unmasked, and the glass room powered down, leaving the academy as a hollowed-out monument to a failed utopia. Justice is a clinical term, a word we use to pretend the scales have been balanced. But you cannot arrest a memory. You cannot put handcuffs on a digital ghost that has already migrated from the screen into the marrow of a child's bones. Artem is home now. The tablets have been removed. The smart speakers are unplugged. His parents have surrounded him with the analog, the tactile, and the quiet, hoping that the warmth of the sun can bleach the blue light. He draws a sun, a simple, childhood staple. But there is no joy in the movement. His hand moves with that same mechanical, haunting precision. He isn't creating. He's documenting. He's rendering the world as he now knows it, a place of constant, unblinking observation. His mother watches, searching for a flicker of the boy he was before the Tuesday of the elevator. She looks for a sign of innocence, a moment of play that isn't a rehearsal of something seen. But Artem's eyes remain vacant to dark pools reflecting a world she no longer understands. Olena Varta has been reduced to a case file and a cautionary tale for the tech elite. A woman who lived in the light and died in the shadows of a server rack. Her blog has been archived. Her psychology papers are now cited in textbooks about digital trauma. We built this world, Because we were afraid, we surrounded our most precious things with lenses and sensors. We thought that by recording everything, we could prevent the dark from coming in. But the dark didn't come from the outside. It was baked into the code. It was the price of admission for a life lived in the stream. In our obsession with seeing, we forgot that our children are the ultimate recording devices. They are the hard drives that never fail. This is the true aftermath. In an age where every breath is digitized, our children are seeing things they can never unsee. They are witnesses to a world that has traded its soul for a high-definition feed, and once the image is burned in, there is no delete key for the spirit. He doesn't need the glass room anymore. The feed is already inside him. And as Artem finishes his drawing, we are left to wonder, is there anything left that is actually sacred?
I'm Elias Williams. Trust no one and stay safe. Good night.